Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Hassan with another episode of the Influence Continuum. And I'm with Laila Mickelwait today, who's the founder and CEO of the Justice Defense Fund and the founder of the Traffickinghub movement, supported by millions around the world. Laila, you have a new book. Maybe I can ask you to hold it up. It's called
Sure.
Takedown: Inside the Fight to Shut Down Pornhub for Child Abuse, Rape, and Sex Trafficking. Great. And for our audio listeners, you have to go and look at the video to see the book. But we're going to do a blog, and we'll put the cover of your book on this. And Laila, you've been researching and combating sex trafficking for over 15 years. And wow, when I first learned about you, this is the first time I've learned about your good work, and I wanted to have you on the show. You've received your master's of public diplomacy degree from the Annenberg School of Communication, and this you've been quoted by endless sources, so all the big shows. So Laila, tell us how you got interested in this, and what led to the book, and tell us about your nonprofit. It's great.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I got set on this path now 18 years ago when I was introduced to this subject matter through a documentary that I saw about child sex trafficking in Calcutta, India. And I was so shocked and horrified. It was at a time when many people didn't know about trafficking and modern slavery. And it was new to me for sure at the time. And I could hardly wrap my mind around the fact that, innocent children were being violated in this worst way for profit. And I began to investigate, research, and ultimately engage in this fight. And I've been doing so ever since. About a little over 10 years ago, I began to investigate the intersection between what I call the big porn industry and sex trafficking and other forms of abuse. And there's a big porn industry, just like there's big pharma, and it's dominated by a handful of companies. The most prominent one that has a virtual monopoly on this industry is called MindGeek. They recently rebranded to ALO, and they own the world's most popular tube sites. These are the YouTubes of porn, Pornhub being the most prominent and well-known of those. And I was paying attention. So I was, I had my antennas up, and I was really disturbed at the end of 2019, when I started to hear some news stories of headlines of children who were being trafficked and abused on Pornhub. There was a 14-year-old girl from California that had been abused by a relative, and her rape and assault was on Pornhub. It was found by classmates of hers and reported that way. And the perpetrator actually ended up in prison. And then there was this story of a woman named Nicole Adamando who, she had a partner that was torturing her and abusing her and uploading the filmed assaults to Pornhub. And she ended up killing him in self-defense. And she ended up getting sentenced to life in prison, separated from her 2 young children. And it was a heartbreaking story. Thankfully, that sentence ultimately got reduced to 7 years, and she's finally out today.
Wow.
But at the time that I read that story, it was just heartbreaking. And then at the same time, there was another story that was haunting me about a 15-year-old girl from Broward County, Florida, who was missing for an entire year. And she was finally found when her mother was tipped off by a Pornhub user that he had recognized her daughter on the site. And she was found in 58 videos being raped for profit on Pornhub. And at the time, I, had a question that was haunting me that I couldn't shake. And that question was, how did this abuse end up on Pornhub? And that is when one night, kind of unplanned, I decided to test the upload system for the world's largest porn site and realized what millions of people already knew, and that it only took an email address to upload. They weren't verifying age. They weren't verifying consent to make sure these aren't rape or trafficking victims or children. And because of that, I realized the site was infested with videos of real sexual crime and was compelled to sound the alarm. And that's when the Traffickinghub movement really started, kind of unplanned in the dark hours before dawn, February 1st, 2020.
Wow, that's amazing. So I've been involved with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and I'm kind of shocked that they haven't been onto this much sooner. I mean, it sounds like you discovered it, because I haven't heard
Well, it
anything.
was hiding in plain sight. And it
Yeah,
was because, Pornhub had done a, a really incredible job as presenting themselves to the world as a mainstream legitimate brand. They had put millions of dollars into their advertising and marketing. They even had an arm of the company called Pornhub Cares, which was this philanthropic arm where they would do these
wow,
massively marketed PR stunts to save the bees and save the oceans and donate to breast cancer research. And they were always saying the same line of, it's legal and consensual, it's consenting adults. And they were presenting this and people bought it, including many activists in this space.
yeah,
And that couldn't have been further from the truth. But they did, there was jokes, faux commercials on Saturday Night Live. They had pop-up shops in New York Fashion Week. People are wearing their apparel proudly in public. And they're just presented as this brand, the most famous brand for porn. And they had, at the time this all started, they had 47 billion visits to the site per year, 130 million visits per day. That skyrocketed during COVID to 170 million and 62 billion visits
mm-hmm.
that year. But they also had 42 million images on the site. They had 6.8 million videos being uploaded every year. It would take 169 years to watch if you watch those videos back to back. This was a massive website, and everybody believed that this was vetted content. And then I discovered, well, it's not. And it's actually a crime scene, and it's infested with videos of real sexual crime. And that's
So tell us what you did next after you discovered this. Did you go to law enforcement or like a lawyer, or like?
Well, the first thing I did was kind of the only thing I could do at the time. I was just kind of working part-time on an hourly basis. I was just off my informal maternity leave because I had a 3-month-old baby that was very, sad and crying at all hours of the day and night. And I was just really, the only thing I could do in my activism at the time was post on Twitter. So I had a few thousand followers that I had amassed from my years of activism. And so I just started to sound the alarm on Twitter. I started a hashtag called Traffickinghub, and I wrote an op-ed that got published in the Washington Examiner, exposing what I had learned and connecting the dots of what was happening and highlighting these very egregious cases that had recently been in the news. And it went viral. A follower of mine encouraged me to start a petition called "It's Time, Shut Down Pornhub and Hold Its Executives Accountable." And that went viral. Today, we have 2.3 million signatures from every country in the world.
Good.
And so as this gained this unexpected and very surprising virality, and as that was happening, victims started to come forward left and right. Whistleblowers and insiders from the company came forward, including the former owner of Pornhub, who reached out to help. And
Wow.
porn performers were jumping on board to help. And, we saw people from the right and the left and atheists joining with Christians and, people who are pro-porn and anti-porn all coming together to say, it is not okay for anybody to be raped for profit on the world's largest porn site. And hundreds of media articles started to be written, and we got the attention of the New York Times journalist Nicholas Kristof, who's a 2-time Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. Yeah. And then he did a multi-month investigation, and he produced this groundbreaking article called "The Children of Pornhub" that sent shockwaves
I read
around
that.
the world. Mm-hmm.
That was you.
Well, it was Nick Kristof, but I definitely, helped connect him to so many victims, including the kind of the face of that article, which was a girl named Serena. Mm-hmm. And, it was an incredible series of events that led up to her coming forward and courageously telling her story. And, I think listeners should know her story, because her story is one that literally could be any child. It could be any parent's child, anyone in this digital age. And, Serena was a 14-year-old from Bakersfield, California. She was a straight A student. She had never kissed a boy before. And she had a crush on a boy older than her. And he convinced her to send him some nude images and videos of herself, which she did because she wanted to impress him. And then he distributed those to his classmates, and they ended up on Pornhub, getting millions of views, uploaded again and again. And it sent her on this spiral of depression and despair where she ended up getting bullied in school. She had to drop out of school. She ended up addicted to drugs to self-medicate and numb herself from the pain. She ended up trying to kill herself multiple times and ended up homeless, living out of a car, all because, Pornhub's executives made a decision that they were going to not only allow, but globally distribute it with a download button so that people could possess and re-upload it again and again, immortalizing her trauma, but heavily monetize all of this free porn for their benefit, for their profit.
So is this company in existence to this day?
Well, MindGeek was the parent company of Pornhub when all this began. MindGeek doesn't exist anymore because they were, actually lost all credit card processing through this fight in the last 4 years. There was this battle with the credit card companies to stop monetizing this illegal content. And that actually ended up being successful thanks to the help of many people.
Yeah.
But they, so the value of the company plummeted and they were sold. The CEO and the COO were forced to resign, and the company was sold to a hastily concocted private equity firm that called themselves Ethical Capital Partners. And they actually renamed the parent company Pornhub to ILO. So they're trying to rebrand, whitewash, in an attempt to save Pornhub is kind of their goal. But MindGeek doesn't exist anymore, but it's a new company called ILO that owns Pornhub.
Is it based in the US, do you know?
It is actually based in Canada. So their headquarters has always been in Montreal, where at one point in 2020, they had 1,800 employees. And this Ethical Capital Partners is also based in Canada, but they're an international corporation. So they have offices in the UK, in the United States, Cyprus, Romania, British Virgin Islands. They have registration. So they're certainly an international corporation.
So they took down a lot of the images because of lawsuits or
so that's after Nick Kristoff's article sent shockwaves around the world. The pressure was on. Visa, MasterCard, and Discover cut ties with the site. We found out later that weeks later they crawled back to their advertising arm, which I can describe how that works. And that was another multi-year battle to get them to stop that. But they were so horrified that they were losing the credit card companies that they decided to do the unthinkable. And they deleted and removed 91% of the entire website. They went from 56 million pieces of content. Today, they have 5.2 million pieces of content on the site. So, 91% of Pornhub was flushed down the toilet because it was unverified content that was infested with videos of real sexual crime.
Yeah, I would only imagine the owners were going to get arrested, and they did it for their self-preservation, would be my guess.
Well, I mean, we're still hoping for that because, the way that the law works is you don't get to commit crimes and then say sorry and, kind of try to clean up a little bit and then go on your merry way, business as usual. Like when you have violated the law, you get held accountable if justice works, right? If the justice system works. And not only have they violated laws on, for example, the distribution of child pornography. Like in Canada, it's illegal to distribute real child sexual abuse. It's also illegal to distribute pretend like images of presentations of child sexual abuse, even if it's not real, like if it's acting. You can't even do that in Canada. And that site, teen was a top 10 search term on Pornhub for years in a row. And that's, that's not 18, 19 teen. That's, depictions of
minors.
12, 13, 14, 15, 16, right? And it's mixed in real child sexual abuse combined with videos side by side with videos of pretend child sexual abuse. In Canada, that's not even legal. The possession of that, it's a criminal offense for victims to possess their own child sexual abuse videos.
Isn't it illegal in the U.S.?
It's illegal in the U.S. as well. I mean, yes, of course. It is a federal felony crime to possess, to distribute, to advertise child sexual abuse. And they had placed an intentional download button on their every single video on Pornhub. And that download wasn't a download like on YouTube when you press download and you can watch it when you're offline, but you don't actually possess that video. You couldn't actually email that video to somebody else. No, this was different. This was where, they had 1,700 servers, and those servers, the child sexual abuse would be downloaded and transferred from their servers onto the devices of potentially 5 million users an hour who were on Pornhub again and again and again since 2007. And each one of those instances is a felony offense to do.
This suggests that they weren't just in it for the money and the eyeballs, but they were actually trying to spread harm to people.
They were in it. I mean, they were doing it for the money. There's no question.
Did you have to pay extra to download?
No, it was a free download button. But in order to understand why they would do that, you have to understand the business model of free porn.
Please explain.
This is the YouTube of porn. The way they make money is by having massive amounts of content on the site. And whistleblowers, insiders from the company came forward and explained this. And when in the book, you start at that night on February 2020 with me, and you go through this journey of discovery, of peeling back the onion layers to learn with me how all of this worked and the deep layers of complicity and the decisions that were made to distribute and monetize this content. And one of the most important things was understanding the way the business worked. And that was that they had to have massive amounts of content to be able to be picked up in Google search results. They had to have inventory to get picked up by the crawl, by every search, to be number one on Google, so that they can drive massive amounts of traffic, which I described to you, right? Up to 62 billion visits
in
2020.
Google manipulation of
so they could sell advertising. So they're selling 4.6 billion ad impressions on Pornhub every day. And that's how they make money off of all of this free porn, including blatant child abuse. I mean, rapes where the victims are actually unconscious, where the rapist is in a mask and he's opening the eyeballs of the victims, touching their eyeballs.
I'm so repulsed.
Yeah, and that's how they were making money. And the ads would be before the video, around the video, after the video. If you press pause in the middle of one of these crime scenes, an ad would pop up in the middle of the video. And that's how they were making their money. And so that's how you have to understand the incentive was as much content as possible. And so you don't want any friction in uploading. You don't want any checks. The moderator said our job wasn't to keep illegal content off the site. It was to allow as much content to get uploaded as possible. And so that's how you can understand the mindset of how they were running the site and why they were allowing so much unvetted content to be uploaded, including illegal content. And they were hiding it from authorities too. I mean, we have testimony now from Canadian Parliament, from the heads of NCMEC, right? The head of NCMEC,
right.
The head of the Center for Child Protection in Canada. And they testified before Canadian Parliament that they never received one report from Pornhub or its parent company in 13 years. Until Traffickinghub went viral, they were hiding known instances of child abuse they knew about, which is against the law. In Canada, there's mandatory reporting laws where it's a criminal offense not to report. And they weren't reporting. I
believe it's mandatory in the U.S. too.
It is mandatory as well. Yes, in the
there
U.S.
are individuals who are mandated reporters for sure. So I'm not sure it's for any citizen, but I know as a therapist, if I don't report something that I know would be happening, it's on me and my license. So that's really terrible. So this has been a full-time nonprofit effort by you.
It has been. It's been, more than full-time in much of this fight since it kind of started to really take off in early 2020. And we're not done yet. So, we've made a lot of progress so far, thanks to, we had 600 organizations involved in this effort and hundreds of victims. The ones that are the most powerful in all of this are the courageous victims who've come forward to tell their stories and to pursue justice in court, because Right. Today we have nearly 300 victims who are suing the literal hell out of Pornhub in 25 lawsuits across the United States, Canada, and the US. That includes 4 class actions on behalf of tens of thousands of child victims.
That music to my ears, because I
Yes.
was saying they
And so,
should be sued.
criminal accountability may be out of their control, right? A victim can't force the government to do something. But what's in their control is civil litigation. And really to hit these companies where it hurts most is in their bank accounts. That's what they care about the most. And not only are they being sued, like the companies being sued, but the individual owners are also being sued by name.
And I think that's what's going to come down the pike with Facebook and X and other social media platforms, that they have to pierce the corporate veil and hold the owners accountable for the bad behavior that's causing such harm. For my regular listeners, you know that I've been a colleague of Carissa Phelps forever, and interviewed her several times. And she was not only a victim as a child, but went on to get her law degree and her MBA and created a company of survivors to help others do trainings. And I know she wants to help sue the bad actors.
And she has been representing Pornhub victims in these lawsuits.
Not surprised, because that's what when I saw her last, she said, that's what I want to do. Enough with going after small fry. Like, let's go after the massive corporations that are making billions off of this.
And to that point, it's not only Pornhub that's being sued. And that's a really important part of this fight. It's not just the bad actors, but their enablers. So Visa, MasterCard, Discover. So Visa is being sued by dozens of child victims. And they lost their motions to dismiss in 2022. A judge, Carmack Carney, a federal judge in California, said Visa gave Pornhub the very tool through which to complete the crime of knowingly benefiting from child trafficking. And not only is Visa being sued, but the hedge funds that have funded Pornhub, that allowed MindGeek to exist, are also being sued by dozens of child victims. And this is because they did their due diligence. They knew what they were funding. And instead of turning away and saying, I don't want to be involved in this, they charge 20% interest on their financing so that they can make a killing on this high risk investment.
Greed. So your Justice Defense Fund, I have another area to suggest you look into, if you will indulge me. But there are people on the internet that basically promise to teach people how to rape people covertly by using hypnosis. And they take American Express and MasterCard and Visa. And they literally promise a money back guarantee if they aren't successful at basically assaulting and raping a fellow human being. And I've been trying to get the media to pay attention, and everyone doesn't want to touch it because they don't want to get sued, or they're afraid of getting threatened or harassed. Have you been threatened and harassed?
Yeah, I mean, a thread throughout the book that readers will, kind of go on that journey with me has been that. And not only myself, but victims who have come forward publicly have been threatened, attacked online. There's been physical attacks that have happened, but they're, kind of anonymous, that have happened to victims who have come forward publicly as well. And it's part of the challenge. And I guess, when you are anybody that's taking on a corporation that is profiting from this kind of content, you're not going up against good guys. You're going up against the worst of the worst who, and so I guess it's part of it. So, going through it, it's like, yes, it's painful, but it's pain with a purpose, and definitely worth it. I wouldn't wouldn't give it up because of the discomfort.
Absolutely. No,
Yeah.
I've been threatened for 48 years and sued and other stuff, but it just makes me reassured I'm doing the right thing because I'm
Yeah,
ruffling
my husband
feathers.
had said snakes are the most dangerous when they're cornered,
Mm,
and that's absolutely true, and has also encouraged me in these kind of darkest moments when I just was so overwhelmed by the stress of not only the content and what was happening with the victims, because it's really a life and death
hmm.
situation for victims. The stakes are so high that,
Right.
we know that, surveys have shown that nearly 50% of victims of image-based sexual abuse online have suicidal ideation. Many of them actually end up attempting suicide
Yeah.
because they feel that it's just, life having to play this sadistic game of whack-a-mole with the
Yeah.
worst moments of their lives on the internet forever. They know that worst moment of their life, that trauma will live on for profit and pleasure after they're dead. And it's such a tormenting
Yeah.
thought. I don't think we even really understand quite enough the specific trauma that is to have a rape video or non-consensual, nude, explicit image of yourself being distributed online, and the shame that goes along with that. And like many of them say, like, I can't even go to the grocery store because I'm terrified that the person in front of me in line has seen my rape video.
Mm,
And so they live with that
yeah.
torment. And,
Yeah. That's terrible.
that was part, so it's, the stakes are high, right, of what's happening. And then there's also the attacks and things that were happening. And, at times I felt, gosh, I don't know that I can continue. But, I was encouraged by the idea that when you face opposition, that you're,
Right.
you're doing something right, I guess, when the
Right.
perpetrators are,
But you're
are kind of
helping
lashing out.
people. You're doing a just cause. So that's a very powerful, motivator. I want to introduce you to a friend and colleague who is a trafficking victim who went on to get her PhD in media psychology. And she did her whole dissertation on how media shaming
Hmm.
causes PTSD. It was the first of its kind study to
Wow.
make the connection. In her case, she was featured in a documentary, and they just mangled her story and
Oh.
made her look terrible. And it really harmed her psychologically. She bounced back, got a PhD, did this whole study, and there's now scientific evidence that this causes real harm.
I'm so interested in that. Could you tell me the name of it? And, I'd love
Yeah,
to.
Christine Marie Katas, Katas. I did an interview with her on my website, and she was actually my student reader for my doctoral dissertation. And she's now helping people who are in the fundamentalist Latter-day Saints, the polygamous community, where they were so isolated that she's helping them get on computers and like enter the real world, but in a non-judgmental way.
Mm-hmm.
I think of her as a saint. I think she's just doing such amazing, wonderful work.
Wow.
So I'm happy to introduce you to
Yeah, that would be
her.
wonderful. I would
Eh,
love to learn about her work. It sounds so important, especially in this context of understanding the harm of, you know, I mean, like media, right? And imagine I can, not to minimize anything that she might have gone through, but then to take, layers of that trauma where, you're naked and you're being abused or raped, and having that out there out of your control. And also this idea, it's so tormenting that people are getting pleasure, right,
Mm-hmm.
from those worst
It's
moments.
very twisted.
It takes it to a new level, I think, of trauma and torment and
Yeah.
profit, right? It's
Yeah.
earning both pleasure for so many people and profit.
Yeah.
So
So I also wanted to ask you, are you familiar with the site Your Brain on Porn?
I am familiar, and
It's
Gary Wilson's work, very important work that he
mhm.
did. And
It
I know.
shows that what's happening, especially with young people who are subjecting themselves to these images, is they can't have like normal relationships with human beings. It desensitizes them. It ruins the human experience of lovemaking.
Well, I mean, it is a terrifying thought to consider the fact that on sites like Pornhub and these free porn tube sites, there's no age restriction.
Mm-hmm.
You could, in 2020, there was not even a click through button that says, "Are you 18?" that a 4-year-old could click through and end up
Yeah.
on the homepage of Pornhub. And there was a study done by, that was published in the British Journal of Criminology, and they studied the videos that were on the home pages of these the most famous porn tube sites, Pornhub being one of them, and X videos and X hamster the other. And they analyzed the homepage videos. They're on Pornhub, just to give you an idea, you could have like 50 different videos and they autoplay as you scroll, so you don't have to click necessarily to view what was on that video. And they found that 1 in 8 of them were depicting non-consent violence, criminal activity, whether that was pretend or whether that was real. It could have been mixed in. We have evidence of child sexual abuse videos on the homepage of Pornhub, where Pornhub actually, their system had chosen a video, that we documented that said CP, not 18, UA sex for underage sex. And it's, commenters are saying they know the child in the video. And that was on the homepage of Pornhub. But think about the fact that children have unrestricted access to this free porn, much of which is an actual crime. And they're witnessing as their introduction to sex to set what Dr. Gail Dines calls a sexual template or a sexual script of what is sexuality from their earliest days.
Right.
And they're watching violence and non-consent and crime as their sex education, and how terrifying it is to see what will happen as those children grow up.
Yeah, exactly. It's developmentally distorting and spoiling a healthy childhood. I wasn't sure if I was going to mention this, but I want to now. Before we started recording, I confessed that I had gone on Pornhub twice. And it was in reaction to a series of interviews I did a number of years ago with people who were self-proclaimed detransitioners. And when I was first told that detransitioners were reading my book, Combating Cult Mind Control, and describing their experience as being unduly influenced, I was like, my son's gay, I'm pro-trans, like, leave me alone. But this therapist who I respect said, yeah, but aren't you curious to understand, like, what's going on with people who believe that they're trapped in the wrong body and they're taking cross-sex hormones or getting surgery, and then believe that they were unduly influenced, and they realize that they're really the biological sex they were born. So I interviewed a number of people, and some were raised in homophobic churches with no sex education, and they were basically gay, but there was no room to be gay in their milieu. It was okay to be the other sex, but there was no room to be gay. Some were on the autism spectrum, but there was a group that basically talked about getting stoned, watching video after video on YouTube of people transitioning, and then they told me about hypnoporn. And I went, hypnoporn? What's that? Because I'm an expert in hypnosis. I've been studying it since 1980, and I even did a couple of chapters on the dark side of hypnosis. So I said, send me the links, and it was a Pornhub. And I watched these videos, and I kept hitting pause because what my subjective reaction was this is so sophisticated. This is like Russian or Chinese state actor level brainwashing. This was not fun or tantalizing. This was very explicit, hypnotic, embedded commands and double binds, programming people that they should be the other sex than they are. So I was horrified. When I've spoken about porn, hypno porn, people think I'm crazy, or they think that I'm just like too conservative, that I'm not I'm not open to kink or something like that. And I'm like, no, I know about brainwashing. This was not anything that would ever fit. So I guess I wanted to share that, just to state that in my world in 2024, what I'm seeing around the world through the internet is psychological warfare, information warfare, with very advanced techniques being used to polarize people, to confuse people, to hypnotize people, to get them to not think and use their common sense, or to keep them addicted to staying online even when they're exhausted and they need to go to sleep. So I guess I'm just putting it out there that I can't help but wonder, because we know that intelligence agencies use sexual seduction as a major technique to recruit. We know about Epstein and his videos, etc. That these sites like Pornhub isn't connected in some way to state actors. I'm just opining.
Well, I mean, I don't know I've what I understand, maybe this is kind of a basic analysis of what's happening, is that really the motivation for all of what's on Pornhub or what's not on Pornhub is profit.
Mm-hmm.
It's a corporation that exists to make as much money as it possibly can, regardless of the harm done. It's profit over people, like many corporations are. In this case, as one whistleblower told me, they're basically gambling with people's lives,
Right.
In a very real sense.
Right.
In that for moderators of this site, they had 10. Compare that, 10 per shift, watching up to 2,000. They were reprimanded if they watched 700 videos per 8-hour shift, up to 2,000. Some of the more advanced moderators were just skipping through videos with the sound off in this kind of dark guessing game. It was like Russian roulette with people's lives, where they were just trying to guess whether it was rape or rough sex, or whether she was 16 or 14 or 18. And that's what was going on. It was those decisions, compare that with Facebook's 15,000 moderators. They still don't have enough. And they're,
Right.
the point of posting on Facebook is that you're talking about what you had for dinner and your political views and,
Right.
Your family photos.
Right.
And on Pornhub, you're posting, they exist to monetize sex videos for profit. And the decision at a corporate level was, we have 1,800 employees. We have hundreds of millions of dollars we're making. Let's put 10 people in Cyprus in charge of guessing on these millions of pieces of content, homemade, shaky, user-generated videos, who's being raped and who's not, and who's a kid and who's not, and who actually consented to having this up and who didn't. And in so many cases, they were guessing wrong. And, another decision. And the decision was made for profit. And it was, they
plausible.
had one person. So again, 1,800 employees, hundreds of millions of dollars a year, one person in charge of working 5 days a week to review videos that were flagged by users as violations of terms of service, including child abuse, rape, and trafficking. They had a backlog of 706,000 flagged videos. And they had a policy where they had to be flagged over 15 times in order to be even put in queue for review, which means a victim could flag their video 15 times and it wouldn't even have been considered for review. And so these are decisions, these are policies. The CEO in depositions and emails uncovered in discovery and lawsuits is quoted as saying this very policy was good and reasonable. And so, and those decisions are driven by, I believe, one consideration.
Money.
Maybe individual users are doing what they do for all different kinds of reasons. I mean, they're not making money. They're doing it for views and clicks and likes and shares, the same reason why people would upload to Facebook or Instagram. But the ones that are making money, it's driven by profit. That's the calculation. And so that's why we understood, in order to change this, in order to really rein it in, we have to follow the money. We have to go after the source of money in order to impact this at scale. Right. And so I guess that's my analysis of.
No, it's plausible. Why. It's the obvious thing for me. When I think about cults, I always think power, money, sex, in that order. Because the people who are at the top of destructive cults are what Eric Fromm calls malignant narcissists. These are people who are not only grandiose and need for praise and transactional, but have no empathy. So these people can't put themselves in someone else's shoes. But the psychopathology is that they think they're above the law, they're pathological liars, they're sadistic, paranoid. So there's a whole list. I put it in my book, The Cult of Trump, in fact. And so for me, my studies for 48 years is these people are driven because they don't have a healthy sense of self, and they don't know what love is. So it's all about needing narcissistic supply, and money will get you a lot of narcissistic supply because people idolize wealthy people and see them in fancy cars and homes.
Right.
And watches.
I mean, that was part of the culture that at MindGeek, I mean, thanks to dozens of hours of conversations with insiders, I got a peek into the Montreal office headquarter culture. And it's exactly what you're describing, like intense narcissism, materialism, where the garage of Pornhub was like a fancy car show with Lamborghinis and Ferraris, and they would flaunt their wealth to one another as much as they possibly could. And the VPs, they had this office nickname called the Divas, and they were, and the management level, the C-suite, they're the bro club, and they operate in this way. There was obviously a lot of arrogance in the idea that they were above the law, that they were untouchable, that they could act with impunity and nothing would ever happen because they were too big. That I actually wrote in my book at the beginning of all this. So many people said that MindGeek was too big to fall, but maybe they were too big to aim at and miss. And they were arrogant and they were sloppy. But yeah, thankfully we're starting to hold them accountable.
For writing Takedown. I'll just give the subtext again as we continue. Inside the fight to shut down Pornhub for child abuse, rape, and sex trafficking. And all I can say is we need a culture shift around the world, back to we need to take care of each other, and we need to protect children first and foremost. They're our future. If we're not taking care of our children, who's gonna run the planet eventually? If kids aren't given love and they're given security and safety and proper parenting. And I've done many things now against digital media and how addictive it is and how it's rewiring children's brains. And I was on Tristan Harris and Asa Raskin, the Center for Humane Technologies podcast, Your Undivided Attention, about how our minds are getting hacked by our cell phones. Like people are walking around instead of talking to each other, being on their cell phones. This is not healthy. This is not how we're gonna, have. What we're gonna have is, the Surgeon General made a comment about children: depression, suicidal, anxious, eating disorders.
It's a dangerous portal, for children. For the work that I do, I mean, I've even seen so many cases of, children who felt like they didn't really belong at school. Maybe they, didn't feel popular, or they couldn't connect with their peers. And so they found community online.
Yeah.
And there's so many predators out there just waiting and fishing for and looking for those vulnerable children to prey
Exactly.
upon them. And what they do is they pretend that they're another teen or tween.
Yeah.
And they develop a relationship with them. They make them feel special. They make them feel loved and liked. And eventually they convince them to send a nude image or a video.
Yeah.
And the child does it.
Mm-hmm.
And then they blackmail them. So sextortion, blackmail. So they say, if you don't send me another one, I know who your parents are. I know your teacher. I know your classmates. I'm going to send this video of you to all those people.
Right.
And they are so terrified that this is going to happen that sometimes they actually kill themselves in that moment because they just can't deal with it.
Yeah.
And sometimes they comply and then they send another one and then it doesn't end, and another one, and they demand another and another and another. And all the while, they're uploading this content online, including to Pornhub where it's being monetized. So that does happen, and it happens all the time.
You described it, and you described grooming and just how cults operate online. And I look at one-on-one relationships. I mean, if someone's just trying to get a nude image to upload, that's one thing. But a lot of the clients I hear from, their loved ones are literally taken away into, by pimps and trafficked. And exactly as you said, their parents are threatened, or they're threatened to be exposed to their peers and such, and they're held bonded in bondage.
I would love to know your, because it seems that you've clearly, studied these issues for a very long time. And, I've learned that one of the most helpful prevention mechanisms, if you will, to help in situations like this for children, or to prepare to be able to respond in situations so they don't go in that direction, is to have a trusted adult that, where you have a shame-free zone in your house, where a child feels that they can talk about what happened without shame, and have a trusted adult, whether it's a parent or a teacher, that they can go to. And that is, one of the most helpful ways to prevent this from going in a bad direction.
That's one part of it. Rachel Thomas has a whole anti-program that I can direct people to in the blog. I'm for utilizing survivors to teach, to say, this is what happened to me, and don't let it happen to you, and literally outline and even show videos. Maybe this is a future project for your funds, but to show videos demonstrating the different techniques, labeling the techniques, and primarily just letting people know that if anybody is telling you, don't tell your parents, don't tell anyone we're doing this, they should run to tell their parents, and to let them, to let parents understand that they need to not just give kids free access to smartphones. Like even now, there's a movement towards giving flip phones to young people, into high school, because they're there to learn, not to be on their phone. And if you need to reach someone, or or get a text to get picked up or whatever for coaching, okay. But we really need to have a shift. And what the big tech companies don't want is regulations like this. They don't want to protect the public because they too are worried about their money and their investors and their value of their stocks. And we have a mental health crisis happening as we speak. And it's really important that people come back to community, back to real life friends, and not followers and cliques of strangers. and values. Like a lot of young people are being asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they want to be an influencer. Huh?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how about being a good person? How about being, a great chess player or tennis player or mathematician or something, like normal.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, with the big tech companies and the big porn companies where profit is the bottom line and whatever they can do to get as many people on their apps and their sites as possible, they don't seem to do the right thing voluntarily because it's the right thing ever. I don't know that I've seen many corporations act that way. And I mean, I think we see this with other industries, the pharma industry or big tobacco, right? Or other industries where it's only through immense public pressure combined with civil litigation that seems to rein them in. And that is kind of the strategy that we have at the Justice Defense Fund, where we believe that through those two primary efforts that we can make a big difference through intense public pressure on those who are in power, shine a light. I mean, an example of this would be in 2022 when at the same time as the judge denied Visa's motion to be dismissed from a lawsuit against Pornhub on behalf of Serena, a child trafficking victim that I described earlier. I think I described her earlier. If I didn't,
yes,
I should.
You did.
But she, at the same time that happened, was able to have an opportunity to go on Squawk Box and call out Al Kelly by name and say, why do you continue to profit from child trafficking? You need to stop. And it was the combination of the public pressure, the shining of the light on what was going on, combined with the litigation that was the real threat.
Sure.
That finally produced the CEO, Al Kelly, putting out a personal statement. He said, this is pretty unusual for a CEO of a company to put out a personal statement, but I feel compelled to do this, and we're going to cut off Pornhub, and we're not going to, and so that's just kind of like a zoomed in example of what I think it takes to rein in corporations that are not doing the right thing voluntarily, is through intense public pressure coupled with strategic civil litigation, where they realize the cost of doing business. For it's too much of a risk, right? We have to increase the risk sufficiently and eliminate profitability. We have to make the risk of continued exploitation greater than any benefit they get by maintaining the status quo. And I think when we do that, we'll force these big corporations to take the steps that they need to take to actually protect children from their harmful products.
Protect, and also money should be given to victims.
Oh, of course. Restitution. I mean, they need that. 100%. I mean, of course, no amount of money, right, could ever be enough to atone for what has happened to them. But it's such an important acknowledgement of what happened. And you probably can speak into this, but what I understand is that, victims need justice to be served, because justice gives them the closure that they need, or the recognition that they need of what was done to them was wrong, and that the abuser is going to pay for what was done to them. And that gives them an important step on their healing journey, where they get that closure necessary through justice being served, not just civilly, but criminally as well. I think that is
ideally criminally. So I have friends who were in the NXIVM cult. Keith Raniere was sentenced to 120 years in jail. And all I can say is the victims of that cult, especially the women who are branded, they felt such vindication that he got to go to jail. And now they get to do a civil litigation against the money that was accrued with the Bronfmans and Keith Raniere. So, but that's ongoing. But it was a big breakthrough, and like Serena, Sarah Edmondson was on the front page of the New York Times with her brand near her genitals that she was willing to say, this is what they did to me without anesthesia, without my permission. And she's doing great now. You know, her kids are doing great. They have a podcast, a little bit culty. I also want to just call out a bad cult that has, I believe, influenced a lot of the CEOs, and that is the cult of Ayn Rand. The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, the author of those two books, she had a cult. There's actually a book called The Cult of Ayn Rand, and she was preaching selfishness is good and altruism is evil. This kind
Never
of
heard that
radical libertarianism and social Darwinism. If you have a lot of money, that means you're a better person than everybody else. And this kind of narcissistic, selfishness is good. Think of number one. And it's just like, who respects somebody like that? I mean, maybe there's some people that look up to people like that, but most people don't. Yikes.
Yeah, it's almost like a loss of a piece of your humanity to go in that direction, as you lose empathy, compassion, ability to love, to put yourself into somebody else's shoes, to focus on yourself and yourself alone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like that would be the recipe for disaster, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to,
I'm calling out those people who still think that Ayn Rand is good or that those books are great. It's like, no, they're not.
I've never heard of them, so I don't know anything about the books.
Ayn Rand. I did a blog on it on Freedom of Mind. I can't help but notice behind your head you have Judith Herman's Trauma and Recovery. And Judith is one of the world authorities, psychiatrists.
Yeah, Judith, actually, I'm so grateful to her. She got an early copy of the book, and she's on the jacket cover with her blurb and endorsement.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, she's done the pioneering work on trauma, and I actually created an online course for clinicians, and I used a video from a training that she asked me to do for her clinicians when she was at Cambridge Hospital, of a woman who had been in a cult but then was in the mental health system for 11 years, misdiagnosed, because nobody understood cult brainwashing. And so they said she was borderline, bipolar, and a million other, and on 19 different medications, and she was in a cult. And she even told her therapist she was in a cult, but nobody did the homework to find out how to help her. So
yeah, it's amazing the work that she has done. And, I'm also now aware of your important work on coercion and the way that is, used in the manipulation and trafficking of so many victims. And I'm going to definitely be looking further into your work on that aspect, because coercion as a means of inducing a commercial sex act and trafficking is so, not very well understood, I think, in law and policy, and, the way that we pursue justice or don't pursue justice in these different kinds of complex situations of abuse. And so I think that's very
wonderful.
important work.
Well, I'm so delighted to know of you now that our paths have crossed. And I'll just say my doctoral dissertation has a model by a law professor emeritus who studied brainwashing and mind control and hypnosis. He calls it the social influence model, and it's a model that expert witnesses can use to explain to judges and juries the influencee and their vulnerabilities, the influencer and their characteristics, their motivation, their techniques, did they have more status over the person, age or position or something, and the consequences. So it's a formula that breaks it down to, predator and prey in a way that isn't just for minors or elderly with dementia, but anybody whose mind can get hacked.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, I also find it interesting. The UN definition of trafficking is slightly different than our US definition, and it includes a phrase that I think is also not very well understood, and that is the abuse of a position of vulnerability, and how that is a means of inducing the commercial sex act that makes it an act of trafficking. And I guess that goes side by side with coercion. But yes,
the vulnerability factor. It's a pleasure to get to know you. I'm going to introduce you to Christine Marie Cadis, and who did the doctoral study on trauma in the media, because I think this is another piece that will be important.
Yes.
So you're working on another book, or what do you want? What's the next?
Oh goodness, I can't even think about working on another book.
No, just promoting this one now.
It's been 3.5 years of laboring over this story, and actually much of it was written as it was happening. But I'm thrilled with what's happened so far. We did get to. I was very happy with a week after release. We got USA Today bestseller.
Great.
List and AP bestseller list, so I couldn't be happier about that. And FYI, 100% of all proceeds from the sale of this book go to the Justice Defense Fund to help pursue justice, to put an end to this, to put in place preventative measures. And I guess that's one thing we just didn't discuss, is a big part of this is not just taking down Pornhub and holding its executives accountable, but it's also putting in place preventative policy to make sure it never happens again, so that there's not another Pornhub that just pops up in its place. And there's a precise law that we're trying to get implemented in governments around the world, and that would be age and consent verification. Third party. So we don't want anybody to have to hand over their ID to MindGeek or Pornhub. I would never do that. But third party age and consent verification for every individual and every single video on a user-generated porn site or any website that per terms of service distributes user-generated porn. And I think that doing that will create an enormous amount of change. And, it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to prevent a massive amount of this illegal content from being able to be uploaded in the first place, because 1 minute's too long. A day is too long for this content to be up there when you have this kind of traffic on these sites. And the other piece of that is not just to get it implemented by government, because these are international corporations. And, this would have to, be enacted in Canada and the United States and Thailand and everywhere, every single country in the world, would have to implement. But if we get Visa and MasterCard and Discover and PayPal to say, just like we have anti-money laundering policy, we have anti-criminal exploitation online policy.
I love it.
We won't do business with user-generated porn sites or websites that distribute per terms of service user-generated porn unless they reliably verify via a third party the age and consent of every individual in every video. And we know that these companies are highly motivated to comply with credit card company demands, because without the ability to process payments, they just don't have a profitable online business. And so they will jump through these hoops immediately, and it will be global and it will be instant. And that's...
So what do we need to do to get this passed?
Well, I guess we need to sue them into compliance. So, with lawsuits against Visa, I think one of the things that victims should and will demand is injunctive relief, in that not only do they have to pay, but they have to change their policies to these policies.
Great. Love it. Laila Mickelwait, thank you so much. Takedown. Inside the fight to shut down Pornhub for child abuse, rape, and sex trafficking. Thank you for your good work.
Thank you for your good work as well.
Pleasure. Take care.
Likewise.
Steve Hassan here. It's been decades since my family rescued me from the Moonies. I've been at this for over 47 years. The need has never been greater. If you're able, please consider hitting the super thanks button below, and it'll help us to do better. Every penny will help us toward our goal of educating the planet about undue influence. Remember, it's your mind, only you should control it.